Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
You are here to hear from Mandy Miller on guided trips in 2 national parks. When Mandy isn't working as a registered nurse, she keeps herself busy with a variety of outdoor adventures. She has hiked much of the SHT, Superior Hiking Trail, and Isle Royale, and canoes, the Boundary Waters, dabbles in rock climbing, camps all throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa in both her RV and her tent, and she loves to stand up paddleboard whenever she gets the chance. Sounds like a perfect rover. Mandy has been a Minnesota Rover for a few years, as was on the board as the events director in 2022. Please join me now in welcoming Mandy Miller.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so thanks, Stacy, for my little intro. So I'm just going to talk about, I took 2 guided trips this year through 2 national parks, and I kind of thought I'd talk a little bit about that and go through my presentation with you. Okay, so we should be on page 2, slide 2. So I'm going to talk about why I chose using a guide and the pros and cons of hanging out with a guide versus just doing it ourselves, and if I'm going to do it again. So I know guided trips really are not the Rover way. They are not as cheap as some of our Rover trips that we took, but some of my planned trips that I had for 2024 kind of derailed a bit. So then I jumped to plan B and gave this a shot. Okay, so one of the trips I took was to Mount Rainier National Park, and I actually just got home from that trip last week. So this entire plan, this guided trip business, started when actually last year I had plans with a hiking partner. We were going to aim to go to Mount Rainier National Park and hike the Wonderland Trail. And if you don't know what that is, it's a very rugged 100-mile trail that circumnavigates Mount Rainier. And they say that the elevation gains and losses is equivalent to climbing Mount Rainier twice, and Mount Rainier is a 14er. So it's a pretty strenuous hike, and they only let a couple hundred people do it each year. So I knew getting selected, my chances were really slim, but my partner and I both said, we're going to go out there regardless, and we'll just day hike or whatever, so we can still see it. So fast forward then to the beginning of 2024, when we were about to submit our permits, my partner had to back out. Something else came up for her, and so she was not going to be able to do this trip with me this year. And now I'm the kind of person, when you present something to me and say, should we do this? I am usually 100% in. And so I had my heart set and my mindset that I was going to go to Mount Rainier and I was going to see the Wonderland Trail. And so this was a big bummer and a letdown to me. So then, of course, all of our gadgets are near us and listening to everything we do. So the very next day, I open my email, and there's an email from a guided service that says, hey, we're doing a trip to Mount Rainier National Park, and we're even going to hang out on the Wonderland Trail. So, of course, I opened this email, right? I'm a sucker for advertising. So I open the email and I read through it, and I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. Close the email, move on with my day. And then I'm like, oh, let's go back and read that email again and close it. And a little bit later, I open it again. This goes on. And pretty soon I'm like, actually, this does sound like a good thing. Maybe I should do this. So I talked about it with my husband, and we were like, yeah, this is how you're going to go and see Mount Rainier and be able to hike. And So there we go. I signed up to do this guided hike at Mount Rainier National Park. And so that's the story of how Mount Rainier happened. And then I mentioned I had a second trip planned, and this was another friend, another hiking friend. And her and I, we were going to do a trip in the spring. She was planning a really big trip for herself this summer, and she needed mileage. And so trying to get mileage in Minnesota in the springtime, you know, with our winters, it was hard. So we said we were going to go somewhere warmer, and we were open to anything. We talked about going to Arizona on the Arizona Trail. We talked about going to California or maybe Tennessee. And then at the last minute, it was just about time, like we really should get our tickets and plan this. She decided she wanted to stay local and she was just going to day hike. But again, I had it in my head, in my heart, that I was going to travel somewhere warmer and get to see something brand new. So I said, okay, you stay local. I'm going to go. So I turned to the same company and I was thinking, maybe there's a last minute deal I can get. And of course, there's not. There's no deals out there. But they did have 2 trips that were for the exact time frame that I wanted. So I chose to go to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. All right, so I'm going to talk about the Great Smoky Mountain National Park trip first, just because I took that one first. I actually took this trip back in March. It was a 4-day, 3-night, full-on hiking, backpacking trip through the Great Smoky Mountains, along the Appalachian Trail. We got to stay in a hut along the Appalachian Trail. I think I have that photo in here. And all the pictures on the slide are things that I've taken. So we had to, you know, it's backpacking, right? So we had to carry our own gear, and they really stressed to keep our base weight really low because we'd have to participate in carrying shared gear. So that's fine. I kept my base weight low, and then I get there, and our shared gear is each of us had to carry 1 canister of fuel for the jet oil. So kind of silly, but I'm not going to complain about that because that was totally fine. And we certainly did not go through that much fuel. But let's see, activity level. So this particular company lists all of their trips as a rating of 1 to 5. So 1 is super easy, anybody can do it. 5 is the most strenuous, difficult thing you can think of. And this particular trip was listed as a 3 to 4. And a 3 to 4 for them means that you would can hike anywhere from 6 to 13 miles a day on steep, rocky, rooty, wet, uneven, exposed terrain with a 3,000-foot elevation gain or loss. And it was no joke. It was a really difficult trip. All of the campsites were in the valleys. And so you wake up in the morning, you have your breakfast, and the first thing you have to do is you have to hoof it up the mountain. And it felt like we were going straight up. And then usually we would get rewarded and have lunch at the top of the mountain. And then we would have to go down the other side, the next campsite that was again at the bottom. So there was a ton of elevation gain that I saw. But it was fun. So cost, you can see I have a range listed there. So for this particular company, if you're a member of them, you get the cheaper price. If you're not a member, you're still allowed to go. You just have to pay a little bit more. And they allowed up to 6 people for this trip. And we had, I think there was 5 of us plus 2 guides on this trip. And we were all solo travelers. So that was really fun. We all got along really well. They provided dehydrated meals for us for breakfast and dinners. And I didn't get a picture of this, but I really wish I would have. We met at a hotel in the morning before we left. And so we took over the lobby and they just spread out all of their assortments of dehydrated meals. So tons of options. I didn't eat the same thing twice. Lots of options for us. We did have to bring our own lunches and our snacks and any beverages that we wanted. But when I got there, they had lots of granola bars and fruit snacks and protein bars and coffee packets and tea packets. So we really were pretty covered. Yeah. And then equipment that they provided was tents, At the time in March when I took this trip, they didn't provide hiking poles, but they do now. And then they provided transportation to and from the Rendezvous Hotel to our trailhead. And then, of course, all the national park permits and all the trip planning and whatnot goes in with that. So that was the Great Smoky Mountains. So Mount Rainier National Park, again, this was another 4-day trip, 3 nights. But this one was hiking and camping, so base camping. So we stayed at a group site in the national park, and then we would take day trips from there. That activity level, it's the same rating, 1 to 5. This one was listed just as a 3. And for 3 for them, it says you can hike 5 to 8 hours a day or up to 10 miles with steep ascents and descents, elevation gains, again, up to 3,000 feet, hiking at an altitude of 8,000 feet. And trails were hard-packed dirt with shale, areas of exposed root rocks, and some rock steps. So this one, a 3, I think that's pretty appropriate for this trip. One of the trails, half of it was paved. One of the trails we took on day 2 was really, really strenuous. So I think that's where the level 3 kind of fits in. But otherwise, everything else, I think all of us rovers probably could have done pretty easily. The cost, I listed that again. It's a range. So again, the members get the lower end of that deal. And non-members, you can still go, but you just pay a little bit more. This one, all meals were prepared and it's fresh. So this photo is a picture of our appetizers that we had before dinner. This was one of the charcuterie boards that we had that night. So I ate really, really well on this trip. Honestly, I didn't need all this much food when I was backpacking or just camping, I should say. But the food was over the top really good. I can't complain about that. This one, they provided tents, poles, the food, transportation to and from the Rendezvous Hotel. This one was based in Seattle, all those park permits and whatnot. And if you're a solo camper, if you're a solo participant with this company, they automatically pair you up with a same-sex partner. And I'm just not that comfortable sharing a tent with a stranger. I don't even share a tent with my best friends when we go hiking. So I did put in a request for a single tent for both of these trips, and I did get single tents. The Great Smoky Mountain, I got a 1-person little tent because we were backpacking. Mount Rainier, they gave us each 4-person tents, and so I had this like tent castle all to myself. So that was kind of fun. All right. Both trips were super amazing. I'm definitely a water person, but I surprise myself every time I go and see the mountains. I really just fall in love with them. But guided trips come with some quirks. And so I just want to go over some of the pros and cons that were pertinent to me. And so maybe that would, if you were to ever do this, or if you've done it before, maybe it resonates too. All right, and I'm going to start with the cons because it's always easier to complain about something. And then we'll end on the positive note. So the cost, obviously you guys can see this. I put it down there again, essentially what it cost me to go on these trips. Let's see, the cost, it doesn't include your transportation out there. So if you take a plane, your lodging, so before and after the trips. For the Great Smoky Mountains, we rendezvoused in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And if any of you guys know where that is, there's really no good flights to Gatlinburg. And I hate flying. I do it, but I hate flying. And I really wanted a direct flight just because I had to check my luggage because I had poles and food and whatnot. So I just chose to go to Charlotte. I'm familiar with Charlotte, so that was easy for me. But then I had to rent a car and drive 3 hours to get to Gatlinburg. And of course, I was freaked out that the airline was going to lose my luggage, and then I would have to figure that out. So I went a couple days early, but being overprepared is good because none of that happened, and so the trip went really smooth. Let's see. So for the Rainier trip, we met in Seattle. So that's really easy. We have lots of flights to Seattle. I actually took the train there just because I've never taken the train, so I thought that was fun. I was talking to Stacy before this. I could do a whole presentation on train travel now. Um, but for Seattle, let's see. The company recommends hotels to stay at, and Gatlinburg, I thought price wise was pretty reasonable. Seattle, just everything is super expensive in Seattle, so I just kind of had to accept that. Um, let's see. Here, hardly a con. The Gatlinburg, I told you I got that little single person tent, and it was really nice. It was clean, a little bit heavier than what I use at home, but it was fine. It was great. And let's see, what else do I got on there? The meals. So for the dehydrated meals for the Smoky Mountain trip, they were great. There was lots of assortment. My tummy is a little sensitive, so they didn't have the brand I would have preferred. It was fine, but I just, if you have, once you learn what backpacking meals work for you, you kind of stick with that. And then also, I'm a really small person, and all of those packages are usually 2 serving meals. And so at home, I always repackage them and divvy it up, and so make them one more appropriate serving sizes for me. I didn't have that opportunity there. But that was fine. Let's see, group dynamics. For the Smoky Mountain trip, all of us were solo travelers. We got along really great. One of the gentlemen, he told us right at the very beginning, he's like, I'm super slow. He's like, I can physically do this. I'm just really slow. And he was, but our guides were really great about keeping everybody together and letting some of us faster people go ahead, but then we'd stop a little bit and let him catch up. So that worked out great. The Mount Rainier trip, there was 10 of us on that trip and 2 guides. And it was a mix of some friends, some family, a couple. I was a solo person. There was another older gentleman who was solo. So there was kind of some niches and little cliques happening. But overall, we all got along really well. And then the guides have very different approaches to hiking and doing stuff too. The Mount Rainier guides, they were 2 really, really young gals in their low 20s, and they were just like, this is great, everything's fine, don't worry, super laid back. One of them was like 8 feet tall, and so her stride was just super long and fast, and so she was ahead of us all the time. If you had a question about like, hey, what kind of tree is that, or what plant is that, or what mountain is that, they would happily answer you, but they would just kind of answer you. So if somebody else had that same question, they might not have gotten the answer, or they'd have to ask it again. Whereas the guides for the Smoky Mountain trip, they were a little bit, they were, I think, young 30s, but they were experienced hikers, and so they had a set pace. And I asked them, I'm like, is this your pace? And they were like, no, this is not our pace. This is the pace we found that works really well for groups. And so I really appreciated that because they kept us together really well. And then if there was something cool that they wanted to point out, like, hey, what is this tree? Or here's an edible plant, they would just stop and wait for everybody to get there and they would talk about it. So just the different guides had kind of different things. The photo that I have on this slide, so this is taken in the Smoky Mountains. And the guide, he had a rule, all of us know we have to take bare precautions and hang our food in our packs and whatnot. But this particular guide has been burned in the past with people keeping food in their tents. And I guess there was a bear incident on one of his trips. So he now has a 0 tolerance policy. And every night, everybody's gear, all of it, your pack, everything gets hung up in the bear poles. So I thought it was a little ridiculous, but he's a guide being responsible for everybody. I kind of get his perspective. So you go with it, but it just kind of made me giggle. So that's a picture of 2 of our packs hanging from the bear poles. And then I wrote the differences in Leave No Trace. And so in Minnesota, when you have to dig your cat hole, like I'll carry my toilet paper out. I pack that out. In Tennessee, they're like, oh no, you leave your toilet paper in the cat hole. So I guess I don't know officially what the rule is in Minnesota, but it's not my rule, and it just kind of weirded me out. So, and in Seattle, we never talked about it, so I don't really know what their rules were. So it wasn't really ever a situation because there was plenty of bathrooms wherever we needed to go in Mount Rainier. Okay, so that was the those were the cons. On to the positives. It was two of the parks that I have been interested in seeing, specifically Mount Rainier and being able to go on the Wonderland Trail. That was really exciting to me. But now that both trips are done, honestly, I'm going to say that I enjoyed the Great Smoky Mountains more. There was just something about it. It was very beautiful. When I went in March, and so nothing was in bloom yet. And so initially I was like, oh, everything's kind of dead and ugly. But you'd be going up these hills and you could see for miles because there was no trees or leaves or anything getting in your way. So I think it was just beautiful that I could see so much. And the biggest pro I would say is the logistics and the permits. They took care of all of that. I didn't have to worry about my permit. Mount Rainier this year just initiated timed entry permits. So if you're going to go to Mount Rainier, you have to get your camping permit, and then you have to get your timed entry permit, and they don't give those out together. So I've been watching the forums, and some people are getting their camping permits, but then they can't get into the park because they can't get a timed entry permit. There's workarounds, but if you're traveling and you're limited on time, that's a pain in the butt. So that was really nice that I didn't have to worry about any of that. They took care of planning the routes, preparing all the gear. Food for the most part was prepared for. They did provide, this particular company provided a packing list. However, it was very broad. It covered things like bring your swimsuit and your winter hat. So you kind of really had to, excuse me, look through it and look at what location you're going to and figure out what you needed. But if you were brand new to hiking or backpacking, I think it would have been very helpful, I think. The Great Smoky Mountains, that was the backpacking trip, they did a gear shakedown for us. And so they literally went through your pack and looked at every item you had, like your toothbrush and how many undies did you pack. And they really went through and wanted to make sure you had a light load so you'd be comfortable. And I was really happy because the only thing that they took out of my pack was my the rope for my bear bag, because they have bear poles there with pulley systems, so I didn't need a rope. And then I also packed my ice cleats because I didn't know if there'd be snow on the mountains in March. And there was only a tiny patch of snow on day one, and so I didn't need those. So those were the only two things that I packed that they had me keep behind. So I was proud of myself for that. Let's see. Oh, training plans. So they provided training or workout plans to prepare you for both trips, and they wanted you to start training at least 3 months in advance and walking 3 times a week. And they said, please don't just walk on a sidewalk or on a treadmill. Get out on a trail with a weighted backpack, and then of course do some kind of strength training and balance work and whatnot. For the Mount Rainier trip, just because we were going to have so much elevation and starting at 8,000 feet, they wanted us to really work on our elevation. So they recommended going up and down stairs. So for me in the Midwest, I can't practice on a mountain. So the best thing I could find was going to Stillwater and doing the Stillwater stairs. So I did that a couple times, twice a week. And I would go up and down for an hour at a time, 45 minutes to an hour. And let me think of the math. 17,500 steps, I think, is equivalent to 1,000 feet in elevation gain, give or take something there. So I'm really, really happy I did that because that was super helpful, I think. You could definitely tell in the group who had prepared physically for the trip and who hadn't. But everybody successfully did do all the trails that we did. So Let's see, so training plans were really good. This particular company offered travel insurance, and I didn't know if I needed it. I'm pretty healthy, but you just never know, right? That's the whole point of insurance. So I did take it. It was roughly $100 for both trips for me, but it was really inclusive. It covered your flights, your rental cars, if you needed medical evacuation. It would cover your gear, it would cover food. So I thought it was a pretty good deal. And especially, again, I was solo on both of these trips, so if I, twisted my ankle or something and needed to drive back to the airport, I didn't have a buddy who could at least do that for me. So I thought this was a good thing. Meals, I showed you some pictures of the meals. Again, I had a good assortment of dehydrated meals for the backpacking trip and just for the top meals for the camping trip. And then equipment, uh, the hiking poles that they provided were really good. The tents were really clean and nice. This is a picture of three of the tents. So my tent is the one farthest in the back. It's a huge 4-person tent, and it was just for me. They gave you this huge rug to put inside your tent. Everybody got a table for inside and outside. Um, if you needed, a sleeping bag or sleeping pad or a backpack or anything like that, you could rent, prearrange that. You could rent it from the company as well. So yeah, so equipment, they pretty much covered you, I think, pretty well. All right, so spoiler alert. The question is, will I do it again? Probably, but there's a really big but. Um, I don't like hiking solo. So if I'm going to continue to do solo travel, I think it was a good plan. The logistics itself was a huge perk for me. Um, Knowing the surroundings and what trails are what, I think was really helpful. The Great Smoky Mountains, the trails are marked really well. So if I ever go back, I would feel really comfortable being out on those trails now. Um, the trails that we did at Mount Rainier, this is kind of where the butt comes in, because the Mount Rainier trip, remember, that was the camping and then we day tripped. Um, Not to be mean, but I I think it was very similar to if any of us stayed at the group campsite in one of our Minnesota state parks and did the hiking loop trail. Like, I feel like I could have done that easily on my own. There was one trail they took us that we kind of got off the beaten path, but otherwise there were people in Crocs. Everybody just had their little water bottles. All of us were with our gear and our hiking poles, and like it was just we were overdressed and overprepared for I think what we did. So if I'm going to do it again, I would probably stick to backpacking trips versus camping trips. Um, and then of course you're limited to what's on their itinerary. So if you are driving past the gift shop and you're like, oh, I just want to swing in, you can't do that unless it's part of the itinerary. Or if you're along the trail and you're like, oh, I want to deviate and go this way because this looks cool over here. If it's not on the itinerary, you can't do that. And then I'm not going to share a tent with a stranger. That's just me. So if you're going to do it, I had to make sure that I requested that early enough in the trip because they do have limited number of solo tents or tents that they put out single occupancy. So yeah, so I think I would do it again, but all right, and then this is just a Google search of guided services that are out there. Maybe you guys have used some or of others. I'm not endorsing any of these companies, but this is what I came up with a Google search that did guided hiking trips within our national park system. Actually, when I was on the train, I met a group that was doing the Road Scholar Rails to Trails through the national parks. And so that was kind of fun for me to chat with them about their group and whatnot. So this picture is Mount Rainier, and it's of Reflection Lake. They told us that most people, when you go to Mount Rainier National Park, you don't actually get to ever see the mountain. We had perfect views of it for 3 days. So that was pretty special there. All right. That was my just generic overview of my 2 trips. So now, if anybody has questions,
Well,
hopefully
thank you.
I
Thank you,
can.
Mandy. Yeah. Um, there are two questions in the chat, and I see Ruth has her hand up.
Okay.
But Jolene was wondering which company you went through.
So I'm not endorsing anybody, but I did go through REI.
Okay. And then the other question was about the tents, tables, and rugs that you mentioned on the one trip. Jen was wondering if they brought those tents, tables, and rugs to each campsite,
They
or if you
did.
had to carry them.
No, so that particular trip, we were at a group campsite. So we had a big van with a giant trailer. And so we just parked in the parking area of the group site. And then it was really close. So just a couple feet, there was the picnic table area and then the tent pads. So I mean, I had to carry it a couple feet, but it was all pretty easy.
Ruth.
Okay, so I have a comment and a question. The
Great.
comment is that we need more Rovers trips so that we don't have to go outside the group and find backpacking trips elsewhere. So we need to do more of that. But my question is, you talked about the meals and how you got to pick a meal, but it's like 2 servings and you don't really eat 2 servings. So you pour boiling water in these things, right? And then it's too much food. So did you find someone else to eat the rest, or did you have to pack it out, or what did you do?
Oh no, I ate it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm not going to throw away food, right? I'm going to eat it, but I don't need that amount of food.
Okay. It wasn't like a massive too much. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. It was more than I needed, but I can put down food.
When you've been hiking, for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Michael is wondering if the elevation was a challenge for anyone in the group.
So in the Smoky Mountain trip, there was that one gentleman who was really slow. And I'm talking slow. He would just take one step at a time, but he did it. And our guides were awesome. They split up. One guide was always in the front, one was in the back, so nobody was ever left behind. And he did it. The Mount Rainier trip, again, the guides, there was always one in the front, one in the back, so nobody got left behind. Some people really struggled on this trip, and there was only one trip on the last day. It was we did all a hike, and then you could do a little extra loop if you wanted to get closer to a waterfall. And there was only one person who said, I'm not going to do the little extra loop because I'm done. But otherwise, we all did it. I have one picture. It's from Eagles Peak. Let's see if I can get back to it. So hold on, everybody. We're going to go backwards through the presentation. So this picture right here, this is at the top of Eagles Peak. And I don't know the elevation gain off the top of my head on this one. But you can see, like, I'm at the cloud level. This one nearly killed us, but everybody in my group successfully did it. There was definitely people who were slower, and colorful words were said at times. So, if you were going to do this and just look at that training guide and take it pretty seriously, like I said, I went to Stillwater once a week. I'm in St. Paul. It wasn't the worst drive, but it wasn't the best drive for me. But I am so glad I made the time to hit those stairs and practice on that, because I think it really made a difference for me. And I consider myself in pretty good shape to begin with. So yeah.
Mandy, Quentin was wondering how much weight you carried, and Michael has a question about your go-to footwear for these hikes.
Sure. So weight, my base weight is right around that 20 to 25 pounds. 20, I try to keep it 20 if I'm using my ultralight tent. I learned once I got to the Great Smoky Mountains that I could have brought my own tent. Had I known that, that would have been great, because their tent even though it was a single, it was 4 pounds. And actually, Ruth, afterwards, you and I went on a trip and I took my 4 pound tent and like, I'm not doing that again. I don't need to hike with a 4 pound tent. But so I think I was probably close to that 30 pounds. They did weigh it. They had the scale with them. I don't think they let anybody go over 35 pounds in their packs. Like I told you, they literally looked through every item you had. So if you tried to bring, something unique or special or personal, like they knew it. So they didn't really let a whole lot of extraneous stuff come. So our packs were really decent. Yeah. And then footwear, I have always been in, I call them ultra foot, ultra shoes. They're the zero drop. And I've always been a shoe person. But the Great Smoky Mountain trip was in March. I didn't know if there'd still be snow. So I did go out and buy the high top boot. They're really lightweight. They're still zero drop. And I fell in love with the boot. And so now I don't even put my tennis shoes on, my hiking shoes anymore. I just wear the boot. And so I wore that actually for both trips. And from the trip, the trail that you're still seeing on the screen, that's Eagle Peak. I'm glad I had hiking boots there. All the other trails that we did though, like seriously, I saw people in Crocs doing it. Like I was overkill. I was overdressed for some of the trails that we did there. What other questions do you guys have?
Sleeping bag or quilt?
I have a hybrid. So I have an enlightened equipment, so it's ultralight. It has the foot bag, I don't know what it's called, where you put your feet in. It's an enclosure, but then it's a quilt on the top. And when that one has seen its lifetime, I'm gonna go full on quilt. And mine is bright purple on the outside and bright pink on the inside, and I love it.
Any other questions for Mandy about Mount Rainier or the Smoky Mountains? Well,
All right.
going once, going twice. Have you hiked other national parks?
Not with a guide service. My husband, well, I've been to Isle Royale lots. I've hiked a lot of the trails in Isle Royale. And then my husband and I, we have hit up, oh gosh, I think, well, we did Route 66 a couple years ago, and I know for sure we hit up 7 national parks just along Route 66, kind of deviating a little bit. So have there been others? So I've probably got 10 national parks listed.
So Cynthia, you see your question? Are you
I do.
and
And now that I said I feel comfortable doing that. Well, I might have just got myself in trouble.
Well, Cynthia is one of the people to talk to.
Yeah, we could totally do it. And I would love to go back. I thought it was so pretty.
Joni was wondering how you trained for your elevation.
That was going to Stillwater and going up and down the stairs. I do weight train 3 times a week. Just that's my personal thing. And then I fit in yoga whenever I have a free day, if that ever happens. But really the elevation gain was going up and down the stairs. The plaque at Stillwater says if you do it 12 times, that's equivalent to a mile, which is also equivalent to 1,000 feet in elevation. My Apple Watch would tell me I was doing 2.5 miles. So I'm not sure which one's right. But 12 times, it takes me about 45 minutes to an hour, and I was really happy with that.
12 times up and down?
Yep.
Oh.
You literally just hoof it up, turn around, come back down, go back up, come back down.
And it took you about an hour.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's hard. And I wasn't in a hurry. I allowed myself to catch my breath once in a while.
Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions for Mandy, we can sign off on this part of the evening. Thank you so much, Mandy. That was wonderful. It was
Yeah, you're
interesting
welcome.
to hear. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.